Welcome to the Mission House, ladies and gentlemen, as we make our way back through time, precisely to the years, somewhere around the year 1700, when the home was built. Now, this home was mostly inhabited by missionaries who were setting up the early Presbyterian church here in the Cayman Islands. And a lot of what you're looking at are original items that were gifted to the National Trust for the Cayman Islands by those whom would have lived here over the years. Family heirlooms, hand-me-downs, and different types of items that would have been a part of the actual original living space. Now, on the wall over here, we have the very first picture of the Mission House. There's a bit of glare on my phone, but you can still see it. And today, what we have still looks a lot like this. We did suffer quite a bit of damage in Hurricane Ivan, but the house was restored and is looking quite familiar, according to the actual picture here. So this is Bordentown, and this is how the district of Bordentown would have looked in yesteryear. Bordentown was really the first capital of the Cayman Islands, and it was a sleepy fishing village. And so what has happened in the Cayman Islands is an extreme phenomenon in terms of the financial mecca that it has become since its days as a small fishing village. This table here is actual original Cayman Islands mahogany. And this would have been an original piece from the actual home at that time. Now, the Cayman Islands, we used to ship our mahogany all over the world. And a lot of the Cayman Islands mahogany was used in Jamaica for the building of their railroads. And so this particular mahogany only grows in the Cayman Islands. It's endemic to the Cayman Islands. This is the original table that would have been in the house that the missionaries would have used during those days for their supper and things of that nature. A lot of what you're looking at on the actual table, the utensils, a lot of those are original as well and were gifted to the National Trust by the families whom would have lived here throughout the course of time. On the wall over here, we have Mrs. Neddy Levy. And she would have went to school here as a young girl at the Mission House. And she was also the neighborhood chatter, which is what they would have called journalists back then. Her job was actually to run on foot into Georgetown and back to Bordentown to bring the news. And I guess it was quite foretelling that her grand-niece today is also a journalist, a lady by the name of Mrs. Jewel Levy. So it runs in the family. Mrs. Neddy Levy lived to be 105 years old, and she attributed her long life to a lot of the running back and forth for the news that she did as a young girl. We'll make our way into the bathroom section of the house. Now, this is where they would have taken care of their toiletries, their hygiene. And as you can see, this tub here is quite an old tub. And I'm not sure whether the tub is the original, though I think it is. Much of the ceramic tiles that you'll see throughout the house, all original pieces from spanning hundreds of years, handed down through family throughout the course of time. This sewing machine is one of the original Singer sewing machines, and it's over 100 years old. And every so often we've got to have someone come in and service it and give us a little bit of maintenance to make sure it's still up and running, but it still works despite being over a century old. Now, this would have been, some of you see some of the clothes they would have worn back then. This little baby, who was, this was the dress she was christened in. Today, I think her great-grandson is a very prominent member of the government today. So this lady would have lived here in the 1940s, and this dress would have been the dress she would have been christened in as a young baby. Over here we have a lot of the marbles that were found when we were excavating the property. And the gentleman who helped with the excavation, Mr. Boosie, his grandparents actually lived in the house. And so he was actually lucky enough to find a lot of the marbles that he would have played with as a child during the excavation. As you can see, the types of irons that they would have used back then, steam irons for their clothes, they would just simply heat the irons and use them to iron the clothes. A lot of the pottery that we found when we were excavating the place, a lot of it we assumed was used to keep oil, maybe store water. And, you know, back in those days, it was a big thing to have oil. And so children would have even received oil for Christmas in containers very similar to the ones we're looking at here. Over here, there's more ceramic that was found during the excavation. A lot of the ceramic work that we found, we believe to be from the Orient. So we are of the view that a lot of the people that were coming to the island were coming from everywhere, they were bringing goods, pottery, clay, different types of food, spices, and a lot of bartering and exchanging was happening at the time. We were able to find a lot of this ceramic during the excavation, and a lot of it we know where a lot of it has come from, and some of it we think came from the Orient. This is Mr. Boosie. Mr. Boosie was very instrumental in sort of developing the home and refurbishing it, especially during the initial phases when they were, getting the specs correct and making sure that, what they were doing was in line with what was here previously. So because of Boosie's vast knowledge and actually having lived here as a young boy, he was able to assist quite heavily in the restoration and preservation of Mission House. And like I said, he was lucky enough to find some of the marbles he would have played with as a young boy in the yard here during the excavation. We make our way further into the home. In the living room area, on the wall, you'll see the first owner of the house, Mrs. Redpath. We believe Mrs. Redpath may have been from nobility. She's a lady that came to the Cayman Islands with quite a bit of money, and she was well-to-do. A lot of people think that she may have been expelled from her family for marrying outside of the noble class. But whatever the case may be, Mrs. Redpath was the person that first came to to establish the house, and then the Lyons took up residence here. And all throughout this time, there would have been missionaries setting up the Presbyterian Church and teaching classes. There was as I mentioned earlier, there was a school here at the house, which was very instrumental at the time. The next residence of the home would have been Mr. Emil Watler and his wife, Mary Jane. A lot of people are familiar with Mr. Emil and his wife, and his grandchildren still live in the area here today. In fact, I was just speaking with his grandson earlier this morning, who is an uncanny resemblance to Mr. Emil. They look exactly the same. Others to have lived in the house throughout the course of time, the Hists. and Mr. Samuel Emsley and his family. People will know, recall the Emsley name from the Emsley Church in Georgetown. So as you know, as I was saying earlier, these homes were inhabited by missionaries, and so the connection is quite strong. Here we have Mr. Samuel Emsley, whose name is associated with the Emsley Church in Georgetown. Now over here we have a piano that was gifted to one of the young ladies who lived in the house, probably in the 1940s or 1950s, we believe. And this piano is still in great condition, still plays. I'd play a few keys today, but I guess there's a time and place for everything, right? Here on the wall, we've got more pictures of the people who would have inhabited this home throughout the course of time. Mr. Emil Watler and his wife, Mary Jane, and their children. These are some of their children. Fantastic. Over in this room over here, we have a little bit of the history, and it only grows here. It's really great for decking, but you can't build a boat or a ship with it because it's very dense and it will sink. But it doesn't rot, which is one of the, you can have this wood 100, 200, 300 years and it will not rot. To join in between is bamboo. Sorry about that, guys. We just had some difficulty connecting there. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. We've had some difficulty connecting. Yes, I'm back now, guys. Can you see me and hear me? Fantastic. So as I was saying, the ribs in between the ironwood used the limestone and sand. They would melt it down, and they would make a plaster go over the wood. And that was how they made it. To my left, you'll see the silver thatch palm. And the silver thatch palm was used as roofing. And it would last up to 10 years on a roof. But you have to cut it on a full moon. If you don't cut it on a full moon, it will not last for the entire sort of time that it would if you did cut it on a full moon. The reason being is because when you cut it on a full moon, the sap tends to drain out, and that is what gives it the utility that it has, the staying power. Over here we have a kiln. This is where they would have melted a lot of the limestone and sand to plaster onto the wattle and dog. They would have also washed clothes in these containers. Here we have a washboard that they would have used. A lot of these items are items as well. We make our way up the stairs. And into the classroom. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is where they would have taught a lot of the classes, a lot of the students, and there's a lot of history on the walls up here as well, talking about the various churches here in the Cayman Islands and how they were established and different people who played prominent roles in the establishment of the church here in the Cayman Islands. But this is where they would have taught a lot of their school classes and even had Sunday school here as well. As we make our way through the house, this was one of the first mansions in the Cayman Islands as well. It's right up there with Pedro Castle as one of the more prominent homes of the time. And a lot of people would have come here just to see the house. It was really a spectacle back then. And this is just a storage room. This here would have been the master bedroom. This is where they would have sort of turned in for the evening. And here on the ground, we've got next to the bed is where they would use, if they had to woke up, if they woke up in the middle of the night and had to use the bathroom. The bathroom in those days was outside. So what they did was they kept a little pot by the bed. And, that was where they would do their business late at night if they had to get up. This is the room. A lot of the original stuff here. This is how the ladies back in those days would have dressed in the Cayman Islands, the missionary ladies. Very conservative and well covered. Sort of indicative of the time. And this is a look at the bedroom here. This bedspread is original from the 1950s as well. So we were lucky enough to have a lot of this stuff donated by the families who lived here over the years. This little area is where Mr. Emil would have had his little smoke in the evening when he retired, and that's a sort of relic of the pipe he would have used back in those days. He was also a policeman, is my understanding, for some time. Over in this room over here, we have another sort of educational room where I think they may have done some school classes. And on the wall, you see a lovely mural of Bodden Town back in yesteryear. It's a beautiful fishing village, people cooking outside, this fresh smell of banana bread and festival and fried fish and music. And it was really a romantic time in Cayman's development. The 50s and the 60s were, people look back at that time with an extreme fondness because the place was so unique, and it was really a quaint little village where everyone got along, everyone shared what they had, and that was the life as they knew it, and that was what they handed down to us as young Caymanians, that camaraderie, that spirit of togetherness, fellowship, and all of the things that you would think that a small community would have to celebrate in order to thrive. Now, on the walls here, you'll see some of the schools, children from back in the days, from back in that time. And here, some newspaper write-up. I think this is Spots School. At the time it was called Spots School. I think today it's probably the Old Savannah Schoolhouse, which is also another property of the National Trust. There's a gentleman on his donkey. We believe this is somewhere here in Bodden Town or even in East End. But this is how this and the catboat, donkeys, horses, and catboats were the main modes of transportation during those years. So this is a quintessential sort of mode of transport that we're looking at here. The gentleman on a donkey. Over on this side here, we've got one of the very few, if not only, picture of slaves here in the Cayman Islands. These people would have been, probably very young when the Emancipation Proclamation was announced. But this is the only picture that we have of people who were born as actual slaves here in the Cayman Islands. This is a monument here up in East End. Some of you may be familiar with that monument on Queens Highway. And this is an old newspaper article. And just basically talking about some of the happenings that would have been happening on the island back then. This picture, we believe, is East End, further up on the eastern districts, eastern side of the Cayman Islands. Most of our visitors spend a lot of their time on the western part of the island, but today the eastern districts are almost as busy And there are hotels and resorts up that side as well. This is how it would have looked back then. Right? Once again, this is Borden Town, a quaint little fishing village. And people back then would have really lived what we call almost a solitary life, in terms of there was no, there was no airport. There was not a lot of happening in terms of tourism or finance, and this is how they lived. It was a village life, village lifestyle. A lot of cooking outside and baking. A lot of lovely smells. I can imagine just looking at this picture what it must have smelled like, what it must have sounded like. To be in the Cayman Islands in those years. So that's a little look here at the Mission House, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stuart Wilson, and it has been taking you on this tour. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions here. Let me see. Somebody says here, I've never seen a cast steam iron before. Absolutely. They are quite rare. And, being as this here, we've been lucky enough to have a lot of these items gifted to us from families who would have lived here and people who'd have traversed this area back in those days, or who may have been, had family or friends who would have had someone that went to school here or lived in the area. So we've been extremely lucky in that regard to have a lot of the artifacts returned. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. We're just having some minor issues with our connectivity here. It's a very, very rainy day here today in the Cayman Islands. And so we've just had some connectivity issues, but I think for the most part, we've been able to manage quite well here. So Iola is saying, everyone has a life story. I'm so happy to have, I never thought we'd live up. Okay, I'm not probably going to read that. Love the sewing machine. My grandma had a sewing machine like that. Thank you, Maureen. Are you a sewer yourself, Maureen? Very interesting. Lovely to see all of your comments today. And I might just try to show you outside so you can see what the outside of the house looks like as well, even though it's a bit rainy today. This is the outside of the mission house. It's a quick look at the grounds. This is the back end of the house. (1700s). This home was built in the 1700s, ladies and gentlemen. And it makes up one of the properties that we here at the National Trust for the Cayman Islands protect and preserve for future and present generations. This is how it looks on the outside when you're coming in, just so you have an idea. So when you guys are visiting the Cayman Islands, feel free to come on down to the Mission House and give us a visit. Usually there's a young lady here who's doing a lot of cooking and sharing some of the traditional dishes and whatnot. So this is really the epicenter of our cultural exchange here at the National Trust for the Cayman Islands. And it's where we run a lot of our programs, cooking classes, arts and craft classes, and what have you. And these are all ways in which we seek to promote the culture of the Cayman Islands while we protect and preserve it for present and future generations. Once again, I'd like to thank you guys for taking the time this morning to join us for this tour. Remember the Mission House here in Borden Town, we're open now for tours again by appointment only. So if you're looking to come along for a tour, feel free to give us a call. We'll be happy to book you in. and take you throughout the house. We've got a breakfast coming up outside where we're going to be using the caboose to cook a old-style Cayman breakfast. And that's, please stay tuned for announcements with regards to the date for that event. We'd love to have you here with us. Thanks again, ladies and gentlemen. It's been an extreme pleasure. I'd like to say thanks to the Department of Tourism for their continued support, and everyone who who played a role in making this morning possible. So thank you so much once again. My name is Stuart Wilson. I'm with the National Trust for the Cayman Islands. If you need to reach me, you can do so at 749-1123. Thank you and have a pleasant day. Cheers.